got the job, or the relationship, or finally finished something you'd been putting off for months. And then something happened. Not dramatically, not all at once, but something in you shifted, and you watched yourself, almost from a distance, begin to dismantle it. Maybe it looked like this. Everything with this person is going well. They're consistent, kind, present, and you start a fight about something that doesn't matter. Or you go cold, or you find the flaw you've been unconsciously looking for since the beginning. And when they finally pull back, you feel something that isn't quite relief, but is close enough to be disturbing. Or maybe it looks like this. The deadline is tomorrow. This matters. You've known about it for weeks. And tonight, you are watching something on your phone, or drinking, or cleaning the apartment in a way you haven't cleaned it in months. Anything except the thing. Or this. You work constantly, 14 hours, 16 hours, weekends. People around you call it impressive. You call it necessary. But the truth, the one you don't say out loud, is that when you stop working, something surfaces that you are not ready to feel. So you don't stop. The relationships thin. The body starts asking questions you ignore. You are building something, yes. You are also running from something. And both of those things are true at the same time. Or maybe it's simpler than any of that. You are talented. People have told you this your entire life, and you have not finished anything in years. The project sits open. The document exists. The idea is good. You know it's good, but you cannot bring it to completion, cannot show it, cannot release it into a world that might look at it and find it ordinary. Because as long as it's unfinished, it can still be everything you hoped. Finished, it becomes real. Real things can disappoint. None of this is weakness. None of this is laziness or fear of success or self-pity dressed up as psychology. This is a system. It is running exactly as it was designed to run. And by the end of this video, you will understand who designed it, when, and why, and you will have two concrete techniques for beginning to change it, not through willpower, through the nervous system where this actually lives. What we are looking at today is called self-destruction. But that word is misleading because it implies chaos, implies irrationality, implies something broken. What I want to show you is the opposite. Self-destruction is one of the most logical, coherent, well-organized things the human psyche produces. It has a function. It has a history. It has a reason, often a very old reason. And until you understand that reason, you cannot change the pattern. You can only judge it. We are going to cover 4 things today. First, what self-destruction actually is and the forms it takes, including the ones that get rewarded. Second, why it happens from 3 different angles: Jung, the nervous system, and internal family systems, because no single framework is enough on its own. Third, where yours started and the specific technique for finding that root. Fourth, 3 practices you can use without a therapist beginning today. This is not a surface-level video. If you stay until the end, you will leave with something precise. The free workbook that accompanies this video, with the written exercises, the root belief map, and the 4-week integration journal, is in the description. Everything we cover here you can work through at your own pace, in writing, in that workbook. What self-destruction actually looks like. Most people think self-destruction looks dramatic: addiction, crisis, collapse. Sometimes it does, but more often it is quiet, systematic, invisible to everyone around you, and almost invisible to yourself. It shows up in relationships as the pattern of leaving before being left, of creating distance just as someone gets genuinely close, of choosing people who are unavailable and wondering why connection never fully lands, of being the one who ends things, always, because ending things hurts less than waiting for the inevitable. It shows up in work as the unfinished, the perpetual almost, the idea that lives in your head for 3 years and never becomes real. Perfectionism is often here, not the kind that produces excellence, but the kind that prevents completion. If it is never done, it can never be judged. It shows up in the body as the ignored, the symptoms you put off, the rest you deny yourself, the food, the sleep, the movement, all the things you know matter, and all the things that somehow never become consistent. And it shows up in productivity, and this is the one nobody names, as workaholism. Workaholism is self-destruction with a public relations team. Society rewards it. You get promoted for it. People admire the hours, the output, the relentlessness. And underneath, a person who cannot stop, not because they love the work, but because stopping means arriving somewhere they are not ready to be. Presence, feeling, the relationships that have been waiting, the question of who you are when you are not performing productivity. Workaholism is dissociation with a calendar. What all of these have in common is not chaos, it is function. Each one does something. Each one protects something. And that is exactly where we go next. Carl Jung observed that the psyche operates like a system of counterweights. Nothing stays at one extreme indefinitely. Push too far in one direction, too controlled, too achieving, too agreeable, too good, and the system will correct. Not gently, dramatically. He called this Enantiodromia, the conversion of a thing into its opposite. The person who has been too responsible for too long will suddenly, inexplicably, sabotage the thing they worked hardest for. Not because they want to fail, because the psyche cannot sustain permanent imbalance. Something has to give, and it will give in the place where control was the tightest. This is not a metaphor. This is a description of how the nervous system actually functions under chronic suppression. Jung located the mechanism in what he called the shadow, the parts of the self that were deemed unacceptable and pushed from awareness. Not evil necessarily, just unwanted. Your anger, if anger was dangerous in your family. Your needs, if needing was treated as burden. Your ambition, if ambition was punished. Your rest, if rest was called laziness. Everything that went into the shadow did not disappear, it accumulated. And accumulated shadow does not stay quiet. It surfaces, always, but sideways, as projection, as compulsion, as self-destruction that seems to come from nowhere. Jung said, "What we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate." The self-destruction that feels like it happens to you is usually shadow acting through you. Richard Schwartz's internal families model gives us the most precise map of why self-destruction happens in real time. In IFS, the psyche is not a single unified self. It is a system of parts, some of which developed very early in response to pain to manage that pain. There are exiles, the parts that carry the original wound, the shame, the grief, the feeling of being fundamentally not enough. These parts are too painful to be present in daily life, so they are hidden. There are managers, the parts that organize everything to prevent the exiles from being triggered. Perfectionism is a manager. People-pleasing is a manager. Control is a manager. And there are firefighters. When the exiles break through anyway, when something triggers that old wound and the pain becomes acute, firefighters activate. Their only goal is to extinguish the feeling immediately by any means available. Binge eating, drinking, rage, dissociation, ending the relationship before it ends you, working until the feeling has nowhere to land. Self-destruction in IFS is almost always a firefighter. It is not malicious, it is desperate. It is a part of you trying to protect another part of you from pain that once felt unsurvivable. This is the reframe that changes everything. The part of you that sabotages is not your enemy. It is your oldest protector. It learned this strategy before it had any other options. The third framework is the shortest and the most biological. Daniel Siegel's window of tolerance describes the range within which the nervous system can function, feel, and integrate experience. Inside the window, presence, connection, flexibility. Outside the window, in either direction, the system goes into survival mode. When something good arrives, genuine love, real success, visibility, intimacy, it can trigger the nervous system out of its window just as effectively as something threatening. Because the nervous system does not only respond to danger, it responds to anything unfamiliar. If love was not safe, love is unfamiliar. If success was not modeled, success is unfamiliar. If rest was associated with punishment, rest is unfamiliar. And the nervous system below conscious awareness will move away from the unfamiliar. Self-destruction is often simply the nervous system returning to baseline, to what it has always known, even if what it has always known is less. We have just mapped what self-destruction is and why it runs. Now we go one level deeper, where yours specifically started and the technique that makes that visible. This is where most explanations stop. We don't stop here. There is a technique from cognitive behavioral therapy called the downward arrow. It was developed by David Burns, and it is one of the most efficient tools for reaching the belief that sits beneath a behavior. It works like this. You identify the behavior, not the pattern in general, one specific instance. I ended the relationship. I didn't submit the work. I picked the fight. Then you ask, if this were true, what would it mean? Not why did I do it? What does it mean about me, about others, about the world? And you follow that answer down. I ended the relationship. What does that mean? That I'll destroy anything good. What does that mean? That I don't deserve it. What does that mean? That people like me don't get to have this. Where did you learn that people like you don't get to have this? There, that is the root. The workbook walks you through this exercise in writing with full prompts, because the downward arrow done in your head stops at the first answer that feels uncomfortable. Done on paper, it keeps going. The second technique is from IFS. It is called parts mapping. Sit with the behavior, not the story about the behavior, the felt sense of it in the body. Where do you feel it? Chest? Stomach? Throat? Let that sensation have a shape, an age, a name if one comes. Ask it, what are you afraid would happen if you didn't do this? Listen to what comes. This part is not you. It is a part of you formed at a specific moment with a specific logic. When you can separate from it enough to ask it questions, you begin to understand it. When you understand it, you begin to have a choice about whether to follow it. And to exercise that choice, you need tools, not just insight. Practice 1. Titration. Peter Levine developed this in Somatic experiencing. The principle: you do not heal by diving into the wound. You heal by approaching it in doses small enough that the nervous system can integrate each one. When you notice self-destruction activating, the pull toward the behavior, the familiar urgency, do not fight it. Orient first. Slow the breath. Place your feet on the floor. Let the nervous system know it is not in the original moment, even if it feels that way. Then approach the feeling underneath the behavior just slightly, 1 degree closer. Not all the way, just enough to feel it without being consumed by it. Then return to the present. Resource. Ground. This is pendulation, between the difficult and the safe, back and forth. Slowly, the window of tolerance expands. Practice 2. Naming the part. Neuroscience confirms what IFS proposes. When you name an emotional experience precisely, the prefrontal cortex activates and the amygdala quiets. Not through suppression, through witnessing. The shift is this: I am sabotaging this keeps you fused with the behavior. My firefighter is activated gives you distance. Enough distance to ask, what triggered it? What does it need? This is not spiritual bypassing. This is neuroscience. The name creates space. The space creates choice. Practice 3. Active imagination. Jung developed this as a method of dialoguing with unconscious material. In its self-help form, it is simpler than it sounds. Write from the saboteur, not about it, from it. Let it speak in the first person. Let it say what it is protecting, what it is afraid of, what it needs that it has never been given. Do not edit, do not judge, witness. What surfaces is almost never what you expected, and what you understand, you no longer have to act out. The workbook has a structured format for this practice, including prompts for each session and a tracking journal. Here is what I want you to carry from this video. Self-destruction is not evidence of being broken. It is evidence of a system that learned very early that certain things were dangerous. Goodness, visibility, love that stayed, success that meant something, rest that was allowed. The system adapted brilliantly. It protected you from things that once would have been unbearable. The problem is not that the system exists. The problem is that it is still running the same program in a world where the original threat is no longer present. It has not been updated. It does not know that you are older now, that you have more resources, that you can, for the first time, tolerate the thing it was built to prevent. That updating, that is the work. Jung said, "The most dangerous thing is the illusion that we have no shadow." The moment you begin to see the pattern, not to condemn it, but to see it clearly, with curiosity, the way you would look at something that has been trying very hard to protect you for a very long time, something shifts. Not immediately, not dramatically, but the grip loosens slightly. And in that loosening, there is room for something else. Begin there. The free self-destruction workbook is in the description. It includes the downward arrow exercise, the parts map, all 3 practices with daily tracking space, and a 4-week shadow integration journal. Everything from today in written form at your own pace. If this named something you have been living without language for, share it. Someone close to you is running this same pattern quietly and does not yet have the words. See you in the next one.